Hi, this is Dr. Victoria Andarcia. Thank you for joining me again this week on the Healthful Roots podcast. Today I'm joined by Nicole Lanni. She is the owner of Help You Get Healthy, and I'm excited to start our podcast today. Nicole, can you tell us what you do?
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me on, first of all. So, I am a functional practitioner and I look at usually the root cause of what's going on with your health. So,
Great. And, looking at, we're going to get into like several things today, but one of the things that I wanted to touch on, because I think some people might feel like they have been exposed to mold and they don't know how to go about it. But I want to talk about your experience with your mold exposure, what your symptoms were, and how you ended up getting diagnosed.
awesome. Well, my mold story is quite different from many, and I've worked with a lot of people with mold since then. So, let's just start with how my journey started. I lived in Las Vegas most of my life, and I just moved to California. So our idea was rent a house for the first year, get acclimated, meet some people, get the kids in school, all of those things that moms think of, right?
Yeah.
And we moved into this cute little rental, super clean house. And within weeks, my family started experiencing symptoms. Now, we had no idea what mold was. And this was back in 2001. So technology and testing has come so far in the last 24 years. But the first thing I experienced myself was a croupy cough. And I had kind of like cold like symptoms and this croupy cough. And I finally went to the doctor because it just wasn't going away. And of course, he's like, "Oh, I think you have bronchitis because of that croupy cough." And my lungs were. So, of course, they gave me a couple prescriptions. They put me on antibiotics. They gave me an inhaler after like the second or third time of me going to the doctor because I was having a hard time breathing. And I was like, oh my goodness, they put me on steroids, all
Mm.
the things, all the things that they thought bronchitis, pneumonia. So it just kept progressively got worse. What was happening to my kids was interesting. So I had found a new pediatrician in town because I had kids. So they weren't going to the same doctor as I was. So my son, all of a sudden, he was having like these allergic reactions. And out of nowhere, he looked like the one morning we joked around that he looked like the Michelin tire man because he was just so
Oh.
swollen, right? And he'd get these hives on his body and I use all natural products. And so for laundry, so I was like, is it something environmental? Is it something at the school? Is it something like, did he change soaps? He's a teenager, young, he just started ninth grade. Was it something he brought home? Like I'm like checking his bags. I'm going through his stuff. I changed laundry soaps, even though I was using natural stuff. I couldn't figure out why he was breaking out in hives. And then my daughter was in junior high and she had just tried out for track and she had been a track runner and all of a sudden she had asthma symptoms. So it was really interesting that we all three had different symptoms. And my husband was as healthy as could be, no symptoms at all. And then I got the call from work, his boss saying, "Hey, we had to take him to the ER. Having this respiratory thing. We need to have him checked out." Well, he was an electrician. He was crawling through roofs. They thought it was something environmental. They couldn't figure out what was going on with him. So, and it passed. They gave him an IV in the hospital because they said he was dehydrated. They gave him an inhaler. They did like a breathing treatment on him, and then he was fine. He never had symptoms after that. He was the one who never had symptoms other than that one day. So it was really interesting that we all had very different things. The kids were intermittent, where mine was progressively getting worse and getting worse and getting worse. And so at one point, like I was literally when I say coughing 24 hours a day, it was even when I was sleeping, I was coughing. I wasn't really sleeping. And my left eye, literally, it looked like it was like the eye was
Wow.
actually falling out of my thing. So I finally went back to the doctor because I really felt like I was dying. Like, I was so sick. And the physician's assistant said to me, I'll never forget, her name is Karen. She went by Dr. Karen. And she said to me, Nicole, you don't happen to have any mold in your house, do you? And I looked at her like she had two heads. Now, remind you, it came from Vegas in a very dry environment. And I was like, what are you talking about? My house is clean. And she said, have you ever heard of black mold? I'm like, no. I was so offended.
That's funny.
No. And she says, do you have any water leaks in your house? And then I looked at her, I said, yes. How did you know that? They said, we have
Mm.
this weird puddle of water and it's showing up on our bathroom floor every morning and we can't figure out where it's coming from.
Oh,
They've
wow.
sent out plumbers. The landlord has come over. Like we're all going crazy trying to figure out where this water comes every morning. But every morning there's this puddle of water on my bathroom floor. And she says, oh my gosh, I want you to talk to your landlord about testing your house for toxic mold. I was like, I don't even know what you're talking about. So she gave me a few things to read. And, the internet was still fairly new, right? So I'm trying to find what I can online. And I'm like, okay, this sounds awful, right? Like, this sounds awful. You can't see it, you can't really smell it. It's in the air, and can be really dangerous too. So the landlord she's like, yes, let's test. I mean, they were really good about this. And sure enough, a mold remediation company at that time. Now, there's tests that you can do at home now, but at the time, they had to send a remediation company over. And when they tested our house, we had the highest count of Stachybotrys that they had ever seen in California.
Wow.
Hmm. And so we had moved out. We'd made plans to start moving out. They put us in a hotel for about 6 weeks. When they tore down the bathroom walls, it was filled with mold.
I got chills.
So
That's awful.
it was really an awful experience. And what happened to me, the next steps were pretty terrible. So my doctor had done a bronchoscopy because, well, what they had discovered, they had done all kinds of testing. And when they did a PET scan, it actually showed that because he felt like I had something in my lungs, I had a mass in my lungs. And then they realized that it wasn't. And then they had even done a biopsy on it to make sure it wasn't, cancer or anything going on. I didn't show any signs like that, but I literally had black mold growing in my lungs.
Oh,
So they did a bronchoscopy, they did a second bronchoscopy, and on the third bronchoscopy, I did not wake up. So I was in a coma for about 4.5 months. Mhm. And so it was probably one of the worst cases of mold. You don't hear people going into a coma because they have mold. But now we're so far advanced that at least people are aware of what it is and you hear
mhm.
about it and you can research and there's home testing and there are blood tests that you can do now where back 20 years ago there wasn't anything like that. So and then he had to figure out how to get it out. So that really started my journey into holistic health at that point. Because when I did decide to, I said, when I decide to rejoin the world, because I think you decide. I honestly
Mhm.
believe that you decide when you have been, I don't know, comas are interesting, but I do believe that you decide. And so when I decided to wake up, I remember asking my doctor, oh my goodness, I have kids. I'm not done. Like, what do I need to do to live? And fortunately, I had a phenomenal doctor. And this is what he said to me. He said, you need three things. He says, I don't know what your religious beliefs are. He says, but I hope you have some faith. And he says, I need you, whatever that faith is, I need you to magnify that by 10. And once you've done that, I need you to magnify it by 100 because you have to believe that you're going to get better. You have to believe it. If you don't believe it, if your mind does not believe it, you are never going to get better. And he says, the second thing you need is me. And he says, I'm not saying that because of ego. He says, but while you've been here, he says, I see you every day. And I have come to the realization that what I'm doing in this hospital is not getting you better. So we need to look at outside sources to get this mold out of your body. And he said, I want you to always remember that doctors are practicing medicine,
Hmm.
And he says, as long as we remember that we're practicing, he says, I have reached out to colleagues all over this country trying to figure out how to get this out of your body. And he says, as long as we remember we're practicing and we don't have all the answers and we're willing to seek them, that's the type of doctor you want. He says, if we're not seeking answers for you, you have the right to fire us.
Yeah.
And he says, and find somebody else. And he says, you have to learn to advocate for yourself. And he says, the third thing you need is I think you need some alternative health sources that aren't in this hospital. And I've done some amazing research and I have found some incredible doctors who are willing to work with you if and when you woke up. Well, now you woke up. So now we can explore some of those things. And so that was really the start of my journey. It did take me another probably 18 months before I felt human again. Like every day was a little bit more, a little bit better, a
Yeah.
little bit better. But it was definitely not a fast journey. And it was probably an extreme case. So people come to me all the time and say, what are the symptoms?
Mm.
And here's the thing, the symptoms are different for every person.
Yeah. And sometimes they're really vague, which I think is what some people struggle with.
Yeah.
But wow, that's a crazy story. That's a very crazy story.
It's a crazy story. I do have to say, I think a hyperbaric chamber really was a big turning point because people often ask, what was the turning point? I was a case study for hyperbaric chambers because people weren't using hyperbaric chambers for mold at that time.
Mm.
And I did use a hyperbaric chamber 5 days a week for 3 months. And that's when I felt my best, is like I could actually breathe. And I think that pure oxygen definitely helped get that mold out of my body.
Yeah.
I did see a nutritionist who we were very creative and started taking out foods out of my diet of anything that could exasperate mold. And then I did a lot of yoga instead of physical therapy. So my doctor's wife would actually pick me up and take me to yoga. So I think some of those practices have really helped turn things around as well.
That's great. And I see that you incorporate DNA, like the DNA testing in your
Mhm.
practice.
I do.
And did you find anything about your detox pathways?
So I do have the MTHFR gene, and I definitely have methylation issues. So I think that could have contributed as well. We just didn't know anything really about DNA,
Right.
20 years ago. And so I think when we open up those pathways, we're able to heal so much faster. And a lot of people don't even realize, even if they don't have specific genes, I think that I think about 40-50% of people actually have a issue with methylation and opening those pathways. And until we do, oftentimes healing doesn't begin.
I agree. And I think that's like, it's because it's interesting that your husband didn't have, as severe symptoms or really, it sounds like not much of an issue with the mold,
Right.
but then you did. But I find that when I'm seeing patients, sometimes their symptoms are too severe for the circumstance. And then I wonder how much of this has to do with their inability to detoxify.
Right. I think detoxifying is really, that's kind of my specialty, is getting people to detox their systems, whether it's autoimmune mold, even with cancer patients, we see that a lot too, that they need to detox their bodies. But I tell people, just don't go out and go buy a detox over the counter. Like, work with a professional that knows how to do it properly, because there's so many things out there that will do more harm for you than good. So if, for your listeners, if they want to go out and, oh, I need to detox, that doesn't mean drinking celery juice for a week. That doesn't mean some of these crazy detox juices. Not that those are bad for you, but if you want to really detox your organs and your cells and the things going on in your body, I would say definitely work with somebody who knows how to do that with ease in your body in the right way. So we do.
Yeah, that I was going to ask you what you
Yeah,
thought about those detox diets. And also, sometimes they're just like 2 or 3 days. And I think that it takes a lot longer than just 3 days to really detoxify and like different modalities, right? I don't know
I
what you
agree.
incorporate aside from nutrition. Are there any other modalities?
So, nutrition, supplements that are definitely nutrition, mindset is a big piece. I really do believe that mindset is a big piece of healing. Emotional trauma, releasing those emotional traumas, helps your body detox as well. And I do believe that lifestyle changes. Like, I think that there's so many things that people don't realize that hold toxins into our body. So, starting with plastic in our kitchen, putting
Yeah.
plastic in our microwaves, drinking out of plastic water bottles. I actually have a water bottle here that I was using as an example yesterday, of why not to use plastic. Drinking out of plastic water bottle. There's a lot of things that I think contribute, environmental factors, um, the detergents that we use, the
Yeah.
the products that we put on our body. When you think of our skin as our biggest organ in our body, right? And then you come in and you slather it with chemical, all
Yeah.
of that chemical is literally going into your body, and it blocks those pathways, and it causes so many different harmful things to your that you don't even realize. So I've got to the point now where I avoid like the cleaning aisle in the grocery store, because I don't use any of those products in my home. I'm super sensitive to them. And
Yeah.
so I literally have to do like the detour around the aisle, because even the smells now can cause a reaction.
It can. And you know what's interesting when you say that is that I used to be someone who used the plugins at the
Oh,
house. And then I realized how toxic they were. And I like just removed all the plugins. And now when I walk into someone's house, it's like the smell like just punches me in the face. It's so strong now, but you
yeah.
get so desensitized when you have them. So
You
really, when you take those out, you realize how strong they are.
you do. I think the I was at a party. This is kind of funny. I was at a party the other day with a group of women, and I was laughing because I was like, what is that smell? Like when you're in somebody's house. And I realized it was one of the women's clothes, because I'm so ultra sensitive. So she must have been using some kind of scented dryer sheet or laundry soap or whatever, but it was her clothes. And every time I was near her, I would, because I'm so sensitive, I would kind of get that gag reflex. And I was embarrassed because she was the nicest person. So I kind of just avoided standing next to her, as
Yeah.
parties move and shift and people move around. I kind of just
Yeah.
avoided standing next to her because I was so sensitive to the smells in her clothing.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, you
So
really get when you once you remove them, you get so much more sensitive. So that's just for people to know. If you won't miss that smell after a
you
while.
you don't miss them. I did a funny video one time, and sometimes you don't realize what you say on videos, and we
Mhm.
laugh about it to this day, because I was saying, and it was for a group of ladies. Ladies, use dryer balls. Buy the wool
Mhm.
dryer balls. You can go on Amazon. They're like $10 and get 3 balls, right? Just throw some lavender on the balls if you want some scent, some like essential oils, and just
Yeah.
throw your balls in the dryer. And everybody just laughed because the way I said it. But there's ways that you can scent things with being a little bit more natural if you really
Exactly.
want and need those scents in your life.
I agree. Yeah, and so you touched on something that I wanted to ask you about during our conversation, but you were talking about emotions, right? And mindset and how that affects your health. And I just wanted to touch base on how you work with people to realize that and how do you help them shift.
It's a great question. Personally, I believe that most sickness belongs starts with emotion. And I think that over the years, people don't learn how to deal with emotion. Like, we're not taught, like, sometimes you'll hear parents say to little boys, don't cry, you're a boy, right? Like, that was a big thing in my
Mhm.
generation. And I think it's so much better now. But we often just stuff down our emotions, right? Like, we get our feelings hurt in school, like especially junior high. I think it really starts, like a lot of it starts in junior high with emotions. Like, we get our feelings hurt, or somebody says something about us, or we just don't feel like we fit in, right? And then that kind of gets stuff down because we
Yeah.
have to go about our day to day stuff, right? And then maybe you have your first boyfriend and you have a breakup, and you might cry for a day or two or whatever, but life goes on, right? And it gets stuff down. And then maybe you had a fight with your mother or your father or your whoever, and then that gets stuffed down. And we're so good at just pushing down these emotions instead of dealing with emotions. And I honestly believe that trauma and emotions are the beginning of sickness, because the people I see that have learned to deal with their emotions live such a healthier and happier life. And if you start reading about science, they're starting to really see that people who release their emotions really do live longer. There's a lot of more longevity and there's less illness in their lives. So I use a technique that is an NLP technique to help release emotions. We release your top 5 emotions. It takes about an hour and a half the first time to get through anger, sadness, fear, hurt, and guilt. And oftentimes with women, I add shame, because there's so many times that we have felt shame in our lives that I think releasing that feeling of shame is really big for a lot of women. So, and then things that happen in our
Yeah.
lives, like big events that happen in our life. Like I lost an uncle recently who I was very, very, very close to. And what did I do? I I cried. I went to the funeral. I came home, and the next day I went back to work. And then all of a sudden, four
Mm.
months later, I was adjusting some things on my bookshelf behind me and saw a picture of him, and the tears came. And I was like, oh, I haven't processed this. And I think we have to allow ourselves time to process what we feel, because if we don't, we end up stuffing it back down. And then guess what? Our health gets worse. So
Yeah.
I literally cleared my schedule for the next couple days, and I laughed, I cried, I talked to my family about him, I called my cousins, I wrote a letter to him. I did the things that I needed to do to just grieve a little bit. And I took the time out to go, oh my goodness, and recognize like I miss my uncle, right? And I think that's a big
Yeah.
piece of life is we don't take the time because we're so busy to process. And so if you could take the time and learn how to do that, I think it makes us a lot healthier. I think I'm going to be
I
60 this
agree.
year. And I think to myself now, oh my goodness, in when I was in my 40s, I was so sick from mold. And now I think, oh my goodness, I'm almost 60 and I feel like I'm 45. I feel like I gained those 20 years back, you know. But there's been a lot of learning process from 2001 to 2025. And I think releasing those
Yeah.
emotions and dealing with things has made a huge difference.
Yeah. That's a beautiful example. I'm sorry about your uncle, but I think that it really highlights one, how you have to give yourself time. And
Mhm.
two, that everyone's grieving process is going to be different. So, like writing the letter, talking to loved ones, right? Like it's not going to look the same for everyone, but you do have to
No.
give yourself time, because one of the things that I feel just from loss in my life is same as you, handle it, go to work and forget it, but it always ends up coming out. And sometimes it comes out like even worse because you didn't do it the way you needed to do it later. And so I
Mhm.
think like it's just like learning what works for you, but just knowing that you have to give yourself time,
Yeah. I
because I
love
think that uh,
I'm so sorry. I
go
love
ahead.
that you feel this way, because so many the people that are in your circle are so fortunate to have a doctor who gets the emotional side of things, because oftentimes you can do all these things, and there's still this illness, right? There's still something going on. And how amazing for your patients that you know that there is this underlying thing that can be going on, and helping them. And I hope that they receive that well and say, sometimes there's an underlying thing, and a lot of illness does start with trauma of some sort.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you. But yeah, I mean, I think sometimes people are looking for testing and testing and testing, but uh, I think maybe we're used to it, or we don't talk about it enough, that we think like traumatic experiences are normal and everybody has them. But that
Mhm.
doesn't mean that it doesn't affect your health. So,
Right.
yeah, so definitely that. But thank you for sharing that because I think it'll highlight to a lot of people how that needs to be part of their like health journey. It's just like learning how to manage and process emotions. But there was one other thing that I did want to talk to you about because I just mentioned the labs. Is I have a lot of women who come to me, right, perimenopause or other time in their life, and they say, I went to see my primary care doctor, and he did labs, and my labs were fine. So, like, what's going on in that situation?
Wow, that's a great question. So I read functional blood work, and so I read blood work just a little differently than maybe Western medicine does, right? And I think
Mm-hmm.
what happens is, first of all, I don't think all doctors know how to read labs. And I say that not with bad intent, but I think they look at them and go, oh, okay, nothing is really jumping off the page, right? But that doesn't necessarily
Yeah,
mean
nothing
there's
is
not
red.
something going on. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like there they are. Oh, there's one thing off. That's okay, right? But I
yeah.
also think that we aren't taught what our labs mean. And so oftentimes I love to teach people how to read blood work, at least their basic blood work. I think there's three panels that everybody should at least understand what they are. And I think there's a lot of misconception out there as well. So I think that everybody should learn how to read a CBC, a complete blood count. So that's your red blood count and white blood count. If you ask most people, they have no idea that a white blood count is really how your body's fighting off infection, right? Whether that's viral, bacterial, fungal, right? And then a red blood count. What do red blood cells do? Like most people have no idea. If you ask them what the difference between a white blood cell and a red blood cell, they don't know what that means. And then we have a metabolic panel, which really tells us what's going on with, um, well, if you add in some A1C in there too and some glucose, but it will tell us what's going on with our blood sugars. It will tell us what's going on with our liver. Is our liver detoxing, right? Like our liver
Yeah.
is, I always say we need to love our livers. And I know that sounds so funny to probably your listeners, but our liver does most of the detoxifying that we need and releases things. So, learning what those markers are, so you can advocate for yourself too. Because if they're off in the Western world, I can promise you they're probably off in the functional medicine world as well. Because we just take those numbers down and they're shrunk down a little bit. So, so we can usually tell with that. And then cholesterol, I think there's a lot of misconception with a lipid panel
Hmm.
and what cholesterol really means. Because a lot of people will say, "Oh, I have high cholesterol," but my golly, we need cholesterol. So as long as the ratios aren't off, that doesn't necessarily mean that, you're eating all the wrong foods or you're doing this. Usually when I see cholesterol, I go, okay, one of three things is usually going on. Usually have a sugar problem, like something's going on with your sugars. You have a thyroid issue or you have inflammation. So I think that most people,
Yeah.
when they think of cholesterol, they think of, oh, this is just food. So if you have an opportunity to hop into a blood work course, um, you know, hop into one and learn what these markers actually mean, because then you can really advocate for yourself with your doctors as well. And I think that's so important that we actually speak up, because
Hmm.
as little ones, we're taught, oh, the policeman keeps you safe, the fireman puts fires out, the doctor keeps you healthy. But oftentimes, doctors are given a 15-minute window to see a patient, because insurance is saying, hey, you get this 15-minute block of time to take care of this patient. And oftentimes, especially, I hate to say this, women are not often heard in a doctor's office. And a lot of their feelings, symptoms just get swept under the rug.
Yeah.
And so when we really look into their blood work about what's really going on, oftentimes we can see that there's some kind of patterns going on. Maybe there's some underlying autoimmune issues that they didn't know they had, or they're not testing positive for yet, because
Yeah.
autoimmune is hard to diagnose. Maybe there's an underlying infection, a viral or a bacterial infection that is just so minute, but it's causing havoc in their body. Maybe that cholesterol issue really isn't a food thing. It really is, you have inflammation. So what is that source of the inflammation? So I think that if we look at labs a little differently, then we can come up with the root causes of what's really happening to our bodies.
No, I 100% agree. And I love that you said that, that the functional medicine range is a little bit tighter because what I tell people is normal is not optimal, right? Because the average
Mm-hmm.
population is sick. So when you're looking at the reference ranges that you get, from LabCorp or Quest or your lab company, that's like the general population. And we're not healthy as a general population. So when you're looking at it through the functional medicine lens, you're looking at what is optimal. And then I love that you said that. Um, a lot of times we're not testing for the right things because sometimes doctors don't know like what to be testing for. Like you said, like the viruses, a lot of times we're really not looking at a full thyroid panel. You're just looking at a TSH. You're not testing for sex hormones.
Mm-hmm.
And especially in women, like the sex hormones have a huge impact. I've had so many women come to me saying, my primary care doctor wanted to put me on a antidepressant, but I know I'm not depressed. And then you look at their like sex hormones and you're like, okay, well, like this is like perimenopause or menopause, right? So it does offer a different lens. So I'm glad that you teach those courses. So you do have several workshops. So I just want to, touch base on what you do, how you work with patients, and like what, if it's not one on one, what other things can people get when they go to your website?
So oftentimes we do have workshops for blood work. There is things about emotional release. So like if you're interested in emotional release, we offer emotional release. We do blood work, and then we do workshops for autoimmune and other things as well. So whatever's currently going on is usually posted on there. We are doing a little revamp with the website, so you're going to see a little bit different changes in the next few weeks. And we actually have a blood work workshop coming up next week, but I'm not sure when this is airing. So, but we will keep you updated on the website of when other blood work workshops are coming up. And really, the reason I teach them is so you understand what the markers are, and how you can advocate for yourself. Because I think that's a big portion of being able to go to the doctor and say, I understand that you're saying, this and this, but this is how I'm feeling. And I believe
Yeah.
that some of these blood markers are actually giving us clues. So you don't have to be in your doctor's, like in their face, but you can say, hey, I
Yeah.
think these are giving us clues. Can we look into this a little bit more? So, and definitely, I'm going to tell the people out there, definitely you want integrative medicine versus a traditional doctor in most aspects, because they definitely look at things very differently.
Yeah, and you have more time, like you have more time to sit down with people and get to like really what's going on in their lives, like how they're eating and things like that a regular doctor doesn't have time for because like you said, they only have 15-minute appointment slots. So that definitely is something that I would recommend too, but I'm biased. And then do you work with people one-on-one or in a group setting?
I do both. Depends on the individual. I do have group programs that we do. And then depending if it's a mold situation, that is a one-on-one for me, because everybody is very
Mhm.
different when they've been exposed to those toxins. So I think that one's a little harder to put in a group setting. If it's something like autoimmune issues, we have group programs for those. So, but individual often will happen if it's like a mold exposure or something kind of out of the ordinary. And people say, well,
Yeah.
what's out of the ordinary? There's a lot of things that can be out of the ordinary. And
Yeah.
emotional release, I can do that in a group setting as well. So I love when I have been brought into groups, anywhere from 2 people up to 300 people. We have done emotional release sessions with individuals all the way up to 300 or 400 people at one time.
Wow.
So it doesn't
That's great.
necessarily have to be individualized.
One-on-one. And you mentioned earlier before we started that if people join the email group, you have offerings or like you do you have a email subscription?
I do. You can go onto the website and there's a little box in there. Just put in your name and your email, and you'll go on to our newsletter, and then you'll be updated with everything that we're doing.
Okay, great. And so I'll redirect people there. I'll put that on the show notes that people can get in touch with you and learn more about the workshops and the services that you offer. But before we wrap up, is there anything, any last messages that maybe you feel like people need to hear based on the clients that you work with that we maybe didn't touch on?
I would say look in your environment. Like, definitely take 30 minutes and walk around your home and go, all right, can I read these ingredients on a bottle? Do I know what these ingredients are? And are these ingredients good for me? Because I do believe there's so many environmental factors. We cannot control what's outside of our homes, but we can control what's inside of our homes. And I think that's and it's starting small. Like, you cannot go out and buy, maybe some of you can go out and buy all brand new cleaning products, but switch one product out at a time, right? Like,
Mhm.
ditch your dryer sheets and buy yourself
Yep.
some dryer balls. That's just a simple little thing that you can do. Ditch your plastic in your kitchen and start using glass instead. So there's just little tiny things that you can do, as you know, you can replace things. And within 6 months to a year, you'll start realizing that a lot of your symptoms are starting to dissipate a little bit, because I think that chemicals and toxins will aggravate almost every illness that is out there. So when you start doing those little things just every day, look around going, oh, you know what? Yeah, that lotion really does have a lot of things in it. I don't know what it is. Let me look for something natural. I think those little teeny changes, step by step, make such a big difference in our health.
I agree. And I think if you like tackle it step by step, it's less overwhelming than thinking, oh my gosh, I have to do all this at once. But I will tag on that for anyone who's looking for cosmetics, home products, the Environmental Working Group has a great website that you can type
Mhm.
in what you're using at home and it'll tell you, like, you know, if it's good, if it's bad. And that's a resource that I redirect a lot of my patients to. Yeah.
It's a great, great resource. And then the last thing I would do is say, practice gratitude. So
Mhm.
a lot of people say, oh, are you grateful? Are you grateful? But I think if we incorporate gratitude into our days, that helps our mindset as well, is being grateful for the good things that we had, even on the bad days. So I'll tell some of my patients, you know, say you saw a leaf blowing across the street and it just caught your attention. That might just be your gratitude for the day, because that's the only thing you can be grateful for. Like, maybe sometimes it can be that small. Other days it can be like, oh my goodness, I got to do this and this happened and this happened. So gratitude can be the smallest little thing, or it can be a big thing. And when we start practicing gratitude, and a lot of people are like, oh, write it down in a journal. You guys, I don't have time for that. So sometimes I just take a minute. And if you do, great. Like, if you can write it all down and you feel good writing like a gratitude journal, go for it. But just take a moment throughout the day. And my husband and I were talking about this one day, and he's like, that's really a good idea, just to like take a moment out of your day. So about a year later, it was a year later, and he had these alarms on his phone. I was like, why does your phone go off at 1 o'clock and at 5 o'clock every day? And he's like, because they do. That was his answer to me. He would not give me the answer. And a couple months later, I finally said to him, tell me why these alarms are going off. He's like, you're going to laugh. That's why I didn't tell you. And I was like, what? And he says, well, you were talking about gratitude one day, about just taking a moment out. And we get so busy that I literally set an alarm for 1 o'clock and 5 o'clock, so I could just take a minute and be grateful for whatever was going on at that moment. And
That's
he
so
says,
beautiful.
and I was like, I'm going to have to tell
Yeah.
all my clients that story. And so I just thought it was so amazing that he literally took the time to put it in his phone, because he says the days go by so quickly and we get so involved in everything, that I realized when you said that I never took the time out. And he says a lot of people do gratitude in the morning or at night because they're programmed to do that. But he says, I want it to like be share that during the day as well. So you guys set an alarm if you need to. Nobody has to know what your secret alarm is. And just practice some gratitude, because that, believe it or not, that whole mindset and that being positive truly helps you live a healthier life.
Yeah, I agree. I love that. And I think that's the
Yeah.
perfect advice to end on. So thank you, Nicole, so much for being on the podcast. And I will definitely redirect people your way.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. It's just been such a pleasure, and I'm grateful for you. So thank you so much.
Thanks.